Having an idea, potentially having co-founders is great, but how do you go about validating that idea? First of all, have you even thought about this as a step? This is such a crucial step and many people don't take it. They go from idea to building the product, skipping the validation step. That's a problem because it's very easy for us to convince ourselves that we have good ideas. I do it all the time myself. What does validation mean? Validation means the very simple step of eliciting a response from the people who you want to use the product or service and eliciting a valid response. Now you will say, well, how do I do that when I don't have the product yet? The answer is you produce some form of mock-up. A mock-up could be as simple as a single web page that has 3 bullets about what the product is going to do. Or if you want to be a little more advanced, maybe it's a couple of different screens that hang together but don't actually do anything. They're not wired up to any actual software. They're just the screens of what it will look like. Or if it's a more physical product, the mock-up could be carved out of wood instead of being made out of plastic. It might not have any actual electronics in it. It might just be the form factor. Another way you might create a mock-up is a short video that actually shows somebody using the product, even though it's entirely fictional, the product doesn't exist. Again, it's something somebody can see and react to. Why does a mock-up matter? Why not just bring a bunch of people in the room and say, hey, we have this great idea, what do you think of it? The reason is people are great at reacting to things, even things that are just barely there. But people are terrible at giving you an opinion about something that's abstract, that's just a verbal description. And so sometimes people say, well, I'm going to run a survey, or I'm going to do a focus group. And that both of those are generally very bad ways of trying to validate a startup idea, because they are asking people to give a reply about something in the abstract. And the kind of replies you will wind up with are the sort of like, yeah, sounds good, or I'm not sure that's interesting, or, oh yes, I have 17 ideas for what this should do. But they all exist in a vacuum. And it's quite shocking how when you give people a mock-up instead, however simple it may be, an object that people can react to. And it turns out people are very, very good at reacting to objects. It's also incredibly important that if you do this validation, you don't bring a whole group of people together at once and let them all react in a group to the product. So don't do a focus group, not even when you have a mock-up. Focus groups tend to be hijacked by vocal people, people who like to hear themselves talk, who want to move the group in a certain direction. And it's also completely artificial. People, when they encounter your product, are not going to be surrounded by another group of people debating your product. It's going to be them and the product. So build a mock-up, keep it incredibly simple, show it to one person at a time, and get their reactions. This is such a crucial step, and yet it gets skipped almost all the time. I think in part it gets skipped because people are somewhat afraid to hear the reactions. And they are so enamored with their idea that they just want to build their idea and not get the reactions. Now, there's one exception to this rule. If you're scratching your own itch, then you are building the product for yourself. So you don't really need to validate it. You are validating it. It's your own need. But if that's not the case, if you fall into any of these other categories where you're really trying to solve somebody else's problem, give them a chance to react to your proposed solution. Now, you might say, how do I find these people to go react to my product mockup? And there are a couple of different strategies that work. One is to literally go to a Starbucks and offer to pay people for their latte in return for them looking at your mockup. Another great trick that lots of companies have used is you put ads on Craigslist. Turns out, in most categories, ads on Craigslist are free. So you can put an ad on Craigslist, and let's say you think there is a need for a dog food subscription service. You might just put ads on Craigslist in the pet category and send people to a mock-up page that doesn't really do anything other than let them, at the end of it, put their name down and register for an email list for when the product launches. that will give you the kind of validation that I think you should always take as a step before you go build the product. One thing that's important about validation is that you don't just go talk to your friends or your family. Your friends or your family are very likely to say, yes, this is great. Nobody wants to pour cold water on your startup enthusiasm. So a big aspect of validation is to go to people you don't know and see how they react to your product mock-up. How many people do you need to validate a product? We're not talking about hundreds or thousands of people. We're literally often talking about a dozen or more people. And you're not looking for some in-depth product design. The product design is your job. You're simply looking for that one step of, do people have an immediate reaction that's either very positive or very negative? Do they say, yes, that meets something, I would use this if it existed? Or do they go scratch their head and go, I don't really understand what you're trying to do here? Or they tell you, I have 7 other things that I'm already using to solve this thing, this need that you seem to think exists. So you're not looking for detail. You're just looking that the idea isn't completely off the mark somehow. The biggest mistake in product validation is that people skip the step entirely. And so they wind up building things that fill an imaginary need as opposed to a real need.